Well, howdy guys and gals, welcome back to the Social Regressive and part 3 in our massive optics series, how to select the perfect rifle scope for you and your individual situation. Remember that even if you have the same rifle and chambering as another guy next to you at the range, your purpose might actually be different, and so you may need a very different scope from what he's using. And today we're going to help you try to find that perfect one. Today we're going to be talking about magnification, which is a really big subject, and this is probably going to be the longest video in the whole series. Magnification, as you'll remember, is the ability to see your target, in this case, larger in your eye than you would normally. So say, for example, you're looking through your right eye at your target at 6x, it's going to appear 6 times larger in your view in that eye than it will to your off eye that has nothing attached to it. You're going to be able to see that quite a bit larger, and as you can imagine, it's going to be quite an aid out in the field. You're probably going to be able to see more detail about your target, and you're going to be able to maybe get a little bit more precisely on target as well. This chart indicates how I generally think about magnification and how it relates to my target. So if my target is large, I'm probably going to zoom out. I'm going to want low magnification. If it's something that's very small, then I'm going to want to zoom in and be able to see more detail and be able to make a more precise hit on it. And related to this is going to be distance, because that's going to change how large and small it appears to my eye. So if my target is close, I'm probably going to want low magnification. I'm going to want to maybe zoom out a whole bunch. I may even want a 1x scope, and then as things get farther away, I'm going to want to be able to zoom in a whole lot more. And now this is where we start to get into some diminishing returns in some cases. A very high magnification scope, a lot of the time, is going to actually have less adjustment range, so I'm not going to be able to deal with a target really far out. So in kind of the middle range, with a small target, that's where I'm going to want extreme magnification, something that's up around 20x or even higher. However, as I start to step out to really long distances, I'm probably going to want to maybe top out at 20x. That's about as far as I'm going to want to go, and I'm probably going to favor something that actually has less. There are going to be some other interactions with tube size, but these are some things to be thinking about, that your scope that can make your image very large might actually be holding you back when it comes time to take that long-range shot. Now for mobility, if your target is very quick and it can change directions very quickly, that's certainly a time that you don't want to be zoomed in a whole bunch, because it's going to be very easy to lose your target and not be able to provide that lead that you need in front of it. If you have a more stationary target, then yeah, you can zoom in a whole bunch more. If your target is dangerous, this kind of relates to mobility, then you're going to want to be zoomed out. You want to be able to deal with something that is at a very close distance and maybe getting a whole lot closer. So yeah, if you have a 1x scope, that's probably going to be good for you. If you have something that is not dangerous, then yeah, you can go ahead and zoom in a whole bunch and not be concerned about, again, losing it in your viewfinder. If you have more than one target that you need to keep an eye on, then yeah, you're going to want to zoom out some. And then if you have one single target, then you can zoom in more. There's going to be one more interaction that we're dealing with, and that is the precision of your rifle and your ammunition. If you can't actually print very small groups, you're probably not going to want to zoom in really close on that. You're going to want to be able to see your misses. So in that case, probably less magnification. Let's dive into some practical examples so you can see what I'm talking about with this chart. So we're going to talk about the extreme of hunting. Let's talk about elephant. An elephant is large, it is very close up, it is very mobile, it's dangerous, and we're probably dealing with just one. Now in this case, elephant hunters usually, because of that danger factor and because of how close everything is, and because their rifles, even though they are very good, are probably not extreme precision rifles like you see back here, this varmint rifle. They are going to favor not just low magnification, they're going to favor none at all. They want, in general, iron sights. They're going to be shooting double rifles that have irons. They want to have that target full in their field of view, and they don't want the chance to miss the appropriate thing that they're shooting at. So if they do have a scope in those rare situations, it's going to be 1x, and they're probably not going to have anything else, no zoom at all. But in most cases, like I said, these guys are going to have iron sights. For an extreme contrast, let's talk about prairie dogs. That is my favorite target, and it's the favorite target of this rifle right here. This is my telekinesis rifle, as I call it. This is a Savage 12 FV that is wearing a Preferred Barrel Blanks, a heavy stainless 26-inch barrel This is in 243 Winchester, and I have used this to vaporize quite a few prairie dogs. That's the target that I have selected the most. And now, what is a prairie dog? A prairie dog is small. It's not going to be all that far away. It's kind of medium range. So we're not talking about extreme distances. Yeah, it is a kind of a far shot. The closest shot that I've ever taken on a prairie dog, I think, was about 50 yards. Average shot is 200 yards. 300 is also quite common. And then kind of on the extreme for me is about 400 yards based on the terrain that we're dealing with in our area. Prairie dogs do move around, but it's usually either a slow kind of move or it's a quick movement from one spot where they stop to another spot where they stop. So usually when they take that shot over their heads, they're going to run to the mound and they're going to stand there and be a stationary target all over again. They are completely harmless. There's no danger factor at all unless you consider the bubonic plague. And then we are dealing with more than one shot at a time. But since they do tend to kind of cluster up around the entrance to a hole, in that case, I don't really consider that to be, kind of that herd factor. It's not like I want to be backing off my zoom so that I can deal with say with hogs, a whole bunch of running hogs at one time. So for the most part, I'm going to be favoring high magnification. This is not an extreme range shot. I don't have to really worry about adjustment on my scope. High magnification is the order of the day. Now let's step things up a bit to the coyote. A coyote is going to be quite a bit larger than a prairie dog. It's going to be quite a bit smaller than a deer. So that kind of lends itself to maybe kind of a higher magnification. However, we do have to keep in mind that this animal could be at any distance. Usually we're calling coyotes in, and you don't know if they're going to appear behind you, to your side, within 50 yards or 25 yards, or if they're going to be out at 1,200 yards when you take your shot. If you check out coyote hunting videos out there, you are going to see a massive array of distances and difficulties of shot that people have taken out there, and you're just kind of stuck sometimes with what you have. Are coyotes mobile? Yes, they are. Sometimes the shot that you have is when they're just trotting along. Maybe you can get them to stop by making a certain sound. But in a lot of cases, say if you do make a miss, you're going to have to get back on that target pretty quickly because those guys can run really fast. Are coyotes dangerous? Not really, not to us. And are we going to be dealing with multiples? Possibly. Sometimes when you call them in, there will be two hanging out together. Remember that they are pack animals, so they might be coming in en masse, but usually when people call them in, they're going to be seeing maybe one or two, maybe three. That's how this is going to go. But if you do want to be able to take more than one, okay, so maybe that's a time to want a little bit of zoom back. Now this is where we get into something that's a little bit different, and that is zoom ratio. If magnification is the ability to see the target larger to our eye than it normally would be, zoom ratio is all about the variability that we get. Can we zoom out a whole lot and zoom in a whole lot in order to see more detail really close up? Or if the target is close to us, can we back out enough that we can actually see it and deal with it, especially if it moves? And that's where we're going to get into some very special and usually very expensive scopes, like this guy right here. This is the Falcon S8i, which I prefer for hog hunting. This is a 1 to 8x scope. This is your kind of LPVO AR style scope, and this can zoom all the way from 1 up to 8. So if I do have a more stationary target that's farther away, I can get stable with my rifle and be able to take that shot. Or if I'm dealing with running hogs like we did on the last hog hunt that we did, I actually had that at 1x the entire time, even when we were at 120 yards, 115 out to 150. I just kept this thing slammed on 1x so that I could continue to track along with them as they moved. And especially as we started creeping up on them in the underbrush, those hogs can get very dangerous. And I didn't want to have the option of losing them in my field of view. So yeah, if you have a target that has a lot of variability to it, either in distance, in speed, or in terms of size, maybe you have multiple different types of targets that you may be dealing with, like, I don't know, coyotes and prairie dogs at the same time, then you may want something that has more of that high zoom ratio. So something like this, for example, this is a 6-24 by 44. This is a Simmons. This is a 44 mag. It has a mil dot reticle, great little scope, very inexpensive. But this only has a 4x total zoom ratio. So it doesn't have as much variability, even though it has more magnification than this little guy, the S8i back here. Now for the animal that automatically pops to mind for most people here in North America when they hear the word hunting, the white-tailed deer. It's quite a bit larger than a prairie dog, and it's quite a bit smaller than an elephant. As far as distances go, we're going to have a little bit of a truncated distance that we're going to be dealing with. Most shots are probably going to be taken from about 75 yards to 200, somewhere in that kind of narrow range. Now, there are going to be extremes at either end, and I know that this is a controversial subject for some folks, especially the Easterners that don't understand why someone would ever take a shot longer than 200 yards. But really, out west, sometimes that's the only shot that you can take. I've got some buddies out west that 400 yards, that's kind of their shot that they take. But even with that, that's not really an extreme of distance, especially when you're dealing with a larger animal like that. Are deer mobile? Yes, they certainly are. So if you miss that first shot, you may be taking a shot at a very quickly fleeing animal. Are they dangerous? Yeah, actually they kind of can be. If you're kind of dealing with a closer range animal, remember that they do have antlers and they might turn those back on you. This does happen. It's pretty darn rare, but remember that animals can defend themselves and they will. So that's another reason to maybe thinking about some lower zoom on some of your scopes. Deer are herd animals, so in some cases, yes, you actually will be able to take more than one shot, and you may be wanting to take a kind of a wider view of the entire herd. So with that in mind, the 3-9 traditional scope that we usually have out there, you can see that it actually makes a lot of sense. 3x is a way to really dial back quite a bit and be able to see maybe multiple animals, to be able to deal with moving targets, and to be able to see more of your target if it is a little bit closer up. And then 9x is going to get you pretty darn close if you want to be able to take some of those longer shots, especially on a stationary target. Now let's talk about the most dangerous game and two different scenarios that people are most likely to find themselves in. One of them is going to be sniping, and then the other one is going to be close quarters, and those are going to have very different solutions. Your snipers are going to have a heavier rifle like this one with big heavy barrels. They're going to be very precise, and their target, as you know, is going to be kind of medium large. Distances are going to range from very close up to extreme distances out there. You're not exactly sure what you're going to be getting into. A lot of it's going to depend on your terrain. For example, police snipers usually do their work at very close distances, whereas your more military ones, they're going to be maybe dealing with targets that are out to 2,000 yards and beyond in some cases. Not only are the targets going to be at very different distances, those targets are very mobile, so whatever is close up may suddenly get very far away, and whatever is far away may suddenly get up very close, and there may be lots of lateral movement. Remember the danger factor here, and remember that you may be dealing with many targets that may be all dealing with you directly. With all those factors in mind, I'm going to favor a scope that has kind of a medium-high magnification, but has a very large zoom ratio. I want something that I can really zoom out on and be able to zoom in decently on and be able to get some of those long distances as well. For example, this scope right here, the Falcon M18, now the M18 Plus, this guy right here actually has quite a lot of travel, and that's something to really take a look at when you're picking your scope. This not only has a lot of travel in the turret, this has, I think, 30 milliradians up and down, but it also has a reticle that has a whole lot of stadia in there. It has a whole lot of hash lines. So if I want to deal with a target that's even a mile away, this scope actually will work. It's quite good for that. But then you get into some of these other ones that maybe have bigger tubes, and that'll get you a little bit more there. But that's a discussion for another video. We're going to talk about tube size in another video coming up here soon. Now for close quarters combat, which is a very different scenario and one that's probably near and dear to the hearts of many of the people that are watching this video. We've had a lot of folks that have purchased a defensive carbine for the first time in their lives, and they want to be able to use it to defend themselves, to defend their homes, their families. So what we're dealing with is a target that is close, it is large, it's very mobile, it's dangerous, and there may be multiple targets. And that's why a lot of people are going toward a scope like this one. This makes a whole lot of sense. This is that LPVO, the low power variable optic, the AR scope that you're going to see everywhere. This can go from 1x to usually 4x. This one, like I mentioned, can go up to 8x. This is a scope that can deal with targets from extreme close range, like me and my buddies have done out hog hunting, to some pretty kind of medium distances. So if you are defending property, this is a good way to go. And if you want to be able to flex this into a hunting rifle sort of situation, you can do that as well, and this will work. Some other options to think about are, of course, iron sights. They do have limitations, especially in the dark. You can kind of lose them. But then you also have the red dots and some of the other really low power kind of fixed scopes like you get from Trijicon. Those sorts of things can get you a kind of a wide field of view, and you can have that little illuminated dot. Now, some of these will actually have illumination as well, and I've tested different types of those sorts of scopes. Actually, I compared iron sights versus LPVOs versus actually forward mounted scopes and red dots and all kinds of stuff to see how these would perform on targets at mixed distances, and the results were very interesting. Make sure you check out that video up here. These can be very powerful and can be useful in a whole lot of different situations. These scenarios probably have your wheels turning about a zoom range that's going to work for you, but before you make your decision, we need to talk about some of the negative interactions that we can get into as power increases on one of these scopes, or as features increase. And this scope right here is an excellent example of some of the negatives that we're going to talk about. Now, I'm not saying that this scope is bad at all. I love this scope. This is a Mueller 8.5 to 25 by 44, and this is the one that I've used to slay most of my prairie dogs. This is just a fantastic little scope, great bang for the buck, very well built. But this starts to indicate some of those negatives. First off, this is a variable zoom scope, so again this goes from 8.5 to 25, and that extra cam tube on the inside is going to take up some of the space that you would have for adjustment. So as a result, this has a very limited adjustment range. It also has very high magnification, and in general, again, you're also going to have a very limited adjustment range on the turrets because of that. Also, with that higher magnification, you're going to get less ability to deal with your windage and your elevation through the reticle itself. This is that mil dot, and so we're not going to be able to deal with windage or elevation quite as much as we would with a scope that's backed off a bit more. It kind of depends on how it's set up on the inside, but scope for scope, if everything else is the same, we're going to have less adjustment. Another thing I noticed with this scope out in dusk conditions, it does not collect much light and get it to my eye, and that's how it's going to go with your higher power scopes. Glass for glass, if everything is the same, if you have less magnification, you're going to be able to get a larger exit pupil, and it will be able to get more light into your eye, assuming that your eye still has the flexibility that it used to. Some older folks won't notice a difference between something that has a large exit pupil and a smaller one, but if you are still young and spry and your eyes are still working pretty well, then that extra exit pupil is going to help you out a lot. And that exit pupil also is going to make it a little easier for you to get your eye in the right spot behind your scope. You probably noticed that some of them you have a very, very small sweet spot, like this one. You have a very tiny spot where your eye can be when you take the shot. And that has, to do with that exit pupil right there. So if you have one that's a bit more forgiving, has a larger exit pupil, you can move your head around a little bit and you can still see everything through the scope just fine. Another thing that's really obvious with this scope in particular is that even though the glass is pretty decent, the more you zoom in on this, the more you see the limitations of that glass and its ability to resolve objects, and also to be able to see how it splits the colors apart. It's called chromatic aberration. Again, this is a good scope. I'm not trying to knock it. I'm just saying that, as far as a bunch of the other scopes on here go that are much more expensive, this one starts to show some of those problems. And we can fix a lot of those issues by increasing the quality of the glass, of course. If we get a higher density glass and start to pay more, we can get a better image. But then a lot of the better scopes that you see here on my bench, those more expensive ones, they also have a much larger objective bell. You can see right here. This Mueller has a 44mm objective. That's usually a pretty decent size, but maybe not for 25x. If we're getting into the higher powers like this guy right here, this is the Bushnell Match Pro 6-24 by 50mm. It has this larger objective bell with that 50mm objective lens inside there, and it also has very good glass. So this is just a killer varmint and target scope. I love this thing right here. Very, very good scope, and this is one that I'm going to keep on this rifle. It works great. And some of the other ones that we have back here, like the US Optics TS20X 50mm objective, Horus Hover 5-20, 50 millimeter. And then the same thing here with the Nikon FX1000 4-16. And if you can find one of these still, I saw that there are some still out on the market, even though they're not produced. This is a wonderful rifle scope right here. Now, of course, with that larger objective, you're also getting into some other kind of negatives. You have a much larger scope that is going to be heavier, and it's possibly going to start knocking around on things. This is where you start getting out of scopes that are easy to carry around and not as easy to hold and shoot as well. These are probably going to be a bit more for prone and bench shooting rather than standing and taking a shot. Now for some of the more personal interactions and things that you need to be thinking about in your own situation. Looking at this rifle right back here with all of its weight, with its muzzle brake, with its 243 Winchester chambering, heavy stock, all this going on, I can get away with this higher power scope, this 6-24, without any issues. The precision of this rifle is so great that I'm not worried even at 24x of missing where a flyer shot may have gone. I'm going to be able to see absolutely everything. And because this rifle is so heavy, the recoil is not going to knock the scope off enough for me to really not see that impact. As long as I'm squared up behind it okay, I'm going to be able to actually see the hit, see the dirt fly, and be able to tell where I hit. If I had a higher recoiling rifle, or if I'm shooting from an offhand position or kneeling, something that's going to have a bit more rifle dynamics going on, then I'm going to want to back off that zoom. I want to be able to see my miss or see my hit. And if I take a shot at a deer, I don't want to try to find the deer again in my scope. I want to be able to still see it after I take the shot. Another thing to think about is that with that exit pupil and the way that it changes its size, it actually kind of changes its position as well. So when I am zoomed all the way in on this at 24x, my face actually needs to be a little bit closer to the ocular bell than when it's at 6x. I actually have to move my head backward just a little bit in order to get the optimal view. And that's going to be the same for every scope that I've ever used. You have to shift your head just a tiny bit. Some of these with the larger exit pupil, you have a little bit more flexibility, but still to hit that exact sweet spot, you do have to kind of shift your head just a little bit. So if you do have that higher recoiling rifle and you have a 30x scope, chances are pretty good that it's going to punch you in the face, like the VX6 did to me. Now that one, that's not really true. The VX6 didn't do it to me. I had a camera attachment on there that took away 1.5 inches of eye relief, and so that's why it hit me there. But still, it's something to think about. And related to that, how quickly do you want to be able to get on your target? A 1x scope is very easy to bring up, see your target, and get adjusted so you can make the shot. Those of you guys that have been varminters or have shot targets at very long distance or very small targets, especially with scopes like this one at 24x, you know how difficult it is to get on target for that very first time. And getting on target can be a big deal, especially when we have targets that are moving or that you have very limited opportunity. If you have a 24x scope like this one, it's actually going to take some real practice to be able to get on target quickly. I've figured out some little tricks so that I can align my rifle before I even get my eye behind the scope and be roughly in the right area. But in general, a 1x scope is going to be very quick and easy to get onto a target because, well, you can see it. Even if you're way off, you can still see it maybe at the edge of your scope and very quickly adjust and get on target. Keep those target dynamics in mind too, because a running animal is totally different from one that is stationary. And for this, you may want to get a little bit more precise when you're figuring out exactly what power you want on the low end. Each of these scopes, even if they're at the same power, they may have a little bit of a different field of view than some of the others. So what you can do is you can go onto the websites for these scopes, and they'll tell you what your field of view is at a given magnification. They're going to be very close, but you might want to get a little bit more precise with this. So for example, when I'm out hog hunting, I may have a hog anywhere between, let's say, 100 yards and 1,000 yards. And I'm going to take a look at the close range first, because that's the most dangerous one. I'm going to kind of calculate the size of my target. My target is going to be about 5 feet from tip of nose to butt. That's going to be one of the larger animals, not the piglets. But then if I factor in the speed of the target at 40 miles an hour, how much lead do I want to be able to give one of these? With the XRS2 scope that I used for this example, the most that I can back that off is 4.5x, and at 100 yards, I'm going to be able to see 24 feet total, left to right, top to bottom, within that scope. So that means that I'm only going to have 5 hog lengths within that. So for a 100-yard hunt, for example, that's probably not the best scope to have. That's going to be one for long-range shooting, if they're a little further out where I can get more lead on them. But for closer up, I'm going to want something that backs off a good bit more, like the S8i that I use for hog hunting recently. This is much better. I can dial it back to 1x, and I can be able to track along not just with one animal that's running, but actually see the whole herd running. We talked a little bit about zoom ratio and its importance when you have very dynamic targets. Ones that are at very extreme different distances, ones that are moving, targets that have greatly different sizes or a very high danger factor. You're going to want to be able to have a lot of variability in your zoom. And the first interaction that I need to point out is the price tag. You will be paying a lot for a scope that has a very high zoom ratio in general. Like this US Optics TS8X. Now, this actually isn't bad for a scope that has an 8x zoom ratio. This is actually quite on the affordable side for that, a lot like that Falcon. And yeah, great scope. I can't recommend this highly enough. This has an FFP reticle instead of the SFP that we have on the other. And I'm going to talk about both of these scopes at another point to kind of indicate how I feel about both of these, because I've used both and I like them both a whole lot. But yeah, in general, the higher that you have that zoom ratio, the more you're going to pay. You're dealing with, a lot more precision within that cam tube. You're dealing with different kinds of lenses, and you're dealing with the ability to really zoom in on whatever crud is on that objective lens, and you're going to be able to see its quality. So usually you have to have a pretty darn good objective lens in a higher zoom ratio scope. Now remember that if you want to remove a lot of these interactions, you do have the fixed power scopes. They tend to have a lot of that adjustment range like we talked about with the SWFA, and they also tend to have a very clear image because they have less going on the inside. So this right here, the Simmons, this is their Pro Target Rimfire. This is a 4x fixed scope, and this has a gorgeous image. I talked about this in a previous review. I'll link to it around here somewhere. But yeah, this with its small objective lens, and it doesn't seem like it should have all that much going on for it. This thing rocks. It has a beautiful, very bright image, and this is one that will work during daylight and down into dusk with a very pretty image going on. So yeah, just some things to think about, some of the ways that you can get, maybe a better image quality and be able to hit the price point that you're after. Thanks a lot for watching, you guys. Make sure that you like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell down below. We have tons more videos coming out. We're going to talk about SFP versus FFP. We're going to get into MRAD versus MOA, and we have a whole bunch of other topics right here that we're going to be talking about. So yeah, don't miss a thing. Tell your friends. But yeah, thank you to patrons of the Destructive Arts for making videos like these possible. These guys are chipping in $1 or $2 a month to keep me in lights and audio. And if anybody else wants to jump in, I'll put a link to Patreon. Thank you to 338 Lapua Magnum sponsors, Stan and Mary, Sportsman's Guide, and Tyler. And then at the 300 WinMag level, we have Howard, Mr. No Name, Joseph Davis, and Peter. And like I say, we have a whole bunch of other dudes. Thank you all a lot. Some of the scopes and mounts and rings that you see back here, you guys bought so that I can test these and bring some of the data back to you. We'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to like, share, and most importantly, subscribe. Even if you didn't like this particular content, go ahead and subscribe. There's probably something coming that's more up your alley. Check out this playlist right here. This is going to have videos in a similar vein to what you just watched. These 2 videos we cherry-picked for you. And finally, The Social Regressive is on Patreon. So you can become a patron of the Destructive Arts and earn some goodies while helping us to provide high-quality videos just by kicking us a few bucks a month. Thanks a bunch for your patronage.